Genesis, the beginning. A word that echoes with divine power, the very root of existence. But within the profound beauty of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There lies a question that often goes unexplored. For in Genesis chapter 1:2, we are confronted with a startling contrast, a world that is formless, void, covered in darkness and submerged in deep waters. This transition doesn't make sense at first glance. Why would a perfect creator allow such chaos? What happened between these two verses, this forgotten time that is rarely discussed? What if the world we know wasn't the first creation? Could it be that Genesis 1:1 marks the start of a restoration, not a beginning? A grand spiritual reset after a cosmic fall that preceded humanity. Imagine that the chaos in Genesis 1:2 isn't the start of the earth, but the consequence of something lost, an ancient world wiped clean before the Garden of Eden. But why does the Bible leave so much unsaid in this pivotal moment? Could the silence itself hold secrets that were intentionally veiled? Genesis, with all its mysteries, invites us to search deeper, to seek beyond the surface. What if the darkness and waters in Genesis were not just symbols of chaos, but of memories, of lost souls, of a world undone? And as we contemplate these profound questions, it's important to remember this. Our purpose might not be just to live, but to restore, to bring light into the darkness, to heal what was broken. The forgotten time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 is not just a gap in history. It's a divine invitation to understand the greater plan of creation. So, as you reflect on these truths, ask yourself, what if you, too, are part of this ongoing restoration? Part of a spiritual awakening that spans from the beginning of time until now? What if this knowledge could transform how you see the world? Share your thoughts below. Let's dive deeper together. What do you think happened in that forgotten time? Let's explore this mystery together, and may it bring healing to your heart. Genesis chapter 1:1 to 1:2. The transition from creation to chaos. Genesis chapter 1:1 begins with a beautiful proclamation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A perfect creation, established by a divine being, filled with intention and love. But then, in the very next verse, we encounter an overwhelming shift. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. A stark contrast. A question arises within us. What happened between these two verses? Was it truly the beginning, or did something take place that we have yet to understand? This transition marks a mysterious gap, one that has perplexed theologians and scholars for centuries. Could it be that Genesis chapter 2 describes the aftermath of something much larger than we can imagine? A spiritual collapse, an unspoken catastrophe that left the earth in disarray. The very words formless and void speak to a desolation that goes beyond mere physical emptiness. They hint at something deeper, a rupture in the fabric of creation itself. And it's here that we begin to ask, could this void be the result of something spiritual? Something unseen by the human eye, but ever present in the very foundation of our world. The concept of a gap in Genesis chapter 1:1 and 1:2 has been a topic of much debate. The gap theory, as it's called, suggests that between the creation of the heavens and the earth and the state of formlessness described in verse 2, a great judgment or rebellion may have occurred. In this view, Genesis 1:1 speaks of a perfect creation, an earth and heaven that were good, pure, and full of purpose. But Genesis 1:2 speaks of something far more troubling, a desolate world, a world that had fallen into a state of chaos and ruin. But why would God, in his perfection, allow such destruction? Was the earth truly created perfect in the beginning, only to be destroyed shortly thereafter? Or could it be that what we read in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 is the beginning of a restoration, a new act of creation after something tragic had occurred? We must understand that the story doesn't end with the chaos. It only begins. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters not to create again, but to restore, to bring life back to a broken world. This speaks to the profound mercy of God, who did not abandon his creation, but set into motion a plan of redemption from the very beginning. In this moment of chaos, the divine act of restoration is one of healing. Healing that reaches far beyond the physical world, touching the spiritual realm that we often fail to comprehend. It's in this chaos that God's love and power begin to emerge, not through immediate creation, but through the divine act of bringing light into the darkness. And the earth, though formless and void, was not without purpose. It was waiting for God to speak into it, to breathe life into it once again. This moment of transition reminds us that life is often not a straight path. We can experience darkness and chaos, times when everything seems to fall apart, and yet God is working in the silence, in the stillness, in the void. The earth, in its formlessness, is an image of our own struggles, the times when we feel lost, uncertain, or empty. But just as God did not leave the earth in darkness, he does not leave us in our chaos. He hovers, waiting for us to be restored, ready to speak light into our lives. And this act of restoration is not just about returning to the past, but about moving forward, about creating something new from what was broken. We all go through moments in life when it feels as if everything has been shattered, when it seems like the world is nothing but a formless abyss. But Genesis 1:2 speaks to us of a God who does not abandon us in the darkness. He hovers over the waters, over our brokenness, and he brings light. He speaks, and life begins to take shape once again. This is not just the story of the earth, it's the story of our own lives. Every time we feel like we're in the dark, like our world is in ruins, we can trust that God is already hovering over us, ready to restore, ready to speak life into our hearts. This is a message of hope. It's the understanding that even in our darkest moments, God is present, ready to restore, ready to bring us back to life. And just as the earth was not abandoned to chaos, neither are we. We are not lost. We are waiting for the divine word to speak, to call us into a new beginning. As we step into this understanding, we must ask ourselves, how often do we ignore the chaos in our own lives, thinking it's something that must simply be endured? What if, instead, it's something that God is ready to use as a canvas for his restoration? What if, in the midst of our struggles, God is hovering over us, waiting to speak light and life into our situations? It's time to reconsider how we view our own chaos. Instead of seeing it as something to escape from, what if we saw it as the very place where God is working the most? The fall and cosmic rebellion. What caused the chaos? To understand the chaos in Genesis 1:2, we must look deeper into the possibility that this destruction wasn't just a natural occurrence, but the aftermath of a cosmic rebellion. What caused the earth to fall into such ruin? Was it simply the end of a perfect world, or was something far more sinister at play? Could it have been a rebellion that began long before humanity ever walked the earth? The concept of a heavenly rebellion is not new. Throughout the Bible, we see hints of spiritual beings who defied divine authority. In the book of Revelation, we read about a war in heaven, where Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels. This heavenly battle resulted in the dragon, identified as Satan, being cast out of heaven, along with his followers. This rebellion was not just a moral failing, but a cosmic act of defiance against God's perfect order. And what if this rebellion, this fall, happened before the creation of humanity, in the very time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2? It's not hard to imagine that such a rebellion could have affected the physical world. In the Bible, the heavens and earth are often interconnected, and spiritual realities can manifest in the physical realm. The fall of spiritual beings, then, could have resulted in the formless void we see in Genesis 1:2, a rebellion that shattered the order of the universe, plunging the earth into a state of chaos and darkness. And this chaos wasn't just the absence of light. It was the result of a deep spiritual wound, a fracture in the fabric of creation itself. What does this mean for us? It means that the chaos we see in the world today is not just a random occurrence. It's part of a larger cosmic story, one that began before humanity existed. The forces of evil have always sought to disrupt God's perfect creation, and we are still feeling the effects of that rebellion today. From the darkness in Genesis chapter 2 to the spiritual battles we face in our own lives, the presence of evil is real, and its origins go back further than we often realize. But here's the crucial point. The rebellion does not have the final word. Despite the fall, despite the chaos and destruction, God's plan of restoration is still unfolding. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, ready to bring order and life back into the world. And just as God restored the earth, He is still in the process of restoring us. Our lives may be filled with moments of chaos and struggle, but God's light is always ready to shine through. No matter how deep the darkness may seem, God is always present, always working to restore what has been broken. As we reflect on this cosmic rebellion and the chaos that followed, we must remember that we are not alone in our struggles. The story of Genesis is not just a history lesson, it's a message of hope. It's a reminder that even in the face of rebellion, God's plan for restoration is always in motion. So when life feels chaotic, when it seems like everything is falling apart, remember this: God is hovering over the waters, ready to speak life into the darkness, and He will not let the chaos have the final word. In this section, we explored the transition from creation to chaos in Genesis 1:1 to 1:2, delving into the possibility of a cosmic rebellion that preceded humanity. We reflected on the spiritual implications of this chaos and how it relates to the struggles we face today. Through this understanding, we see that God's restoration plan is always at work, even in the darkest times. The role of spiritual beings in the forgotten world. When we look at Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, we are not merely seeing the physical world unfold, but witnessing the echoes of a far greater cosmic story. The earth, as we know it, was not the beginning of everything. There were spiritual beings that existed before humanity ever walked the earth, and their actions shaped the very foundations of creation. Genesis doesn't tell us all the details, but what is left unsaid speaks volumes about the unseen realm. In the book of Job, God speaks of the morning stars and sons of God shouting for joy when the earth was laid. This imagery reveals that the creation was not an isolated event. It was witnessed by a spiritual audience. Before humanity, before Adam and Eve, there was a kingdom, a world ruled by beings who were spiritual in nature. These were not just angels, but powerful beings who served in the heavenly courts, witnessing the grand design of the Creator. They were not part of the physical creation as we know it, but existed in a divine spiritual reality. However, this pristine order was shattered when some of these spiritual beings chose to rebel. These angels, who had been given great authority and wisdom, desired more than to serve. They longed for power, for control, for supremacy. They wanted to create, to dominate, and even to be worshipped, a desire that corrupted their essence and led them to defy divine order. Their fall was not just a moral failure, but a cosmic one, a rebellion that rippled throughout the universe and caused the very foundations of creation to tremble. When we look at Genesis chapter 1-2, the formlessness and void that are described may very well be the result of this heavenly rebellion. The earth, once a beautiful and harmonious creation, was plunged into a state of chaos and ruin. The rebellion of these spiritual beings caused a rupture, one that affected not only the heavenly realms, but also the physical world that was yet to be. The destruction was not just spiritual, it was physical as well, and the consequences of that fall were felt in the very fabric of creation. This fall speaks to us of the power of choice. These beings were given the freedom to choose, and their rebellion shows us that even in the spiritual realm, free will holds great consequences. It's a lesson that carries over into our own lives. Just as these spiritual beings had the ability to choose, we too are given choices every day. Our choices, small or large, can either align with divine order or cause disruption in our own lives and in the lives of those around us. The fall of these beings serves as a stark reminder of the cost of disobedience and the importance of aligning ourselves with the divine purpose. But even in their rebellion, God did not abandon creation. Though these beings had broken the harmony of the spiritual world, God's plan did not end there. His restoration was already set in motion. The story of Genesis is not just about the beginning of the earth, it is about the ongoing work of redemption. And it's through the next act of creation, the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, that we see the first steps of this divine restoration. Restoration, rather than creation. What was the Spirit of God doing? As we move from the chaos in Genesis chapter 1-2 to the restoration in verse 3, we must focus on the most profound act in the creation narrative, the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. This act is not the beginning of creation from nothing, as many may assume. Instead, it is the divine act of restoration. The Spirit of God is not creating the earth anew, but rather he is preparing to restore it to its intended form after a great devastation. The Hebrew word used for hovering carries a powerful meaning. It suggests something more than just moving above. It speaks of vibrating, shaking, and reawakening what had been dormant. Imagine a world in ruins, covered in darkness, and then a divine presence begins to move over the waters. The Spirit of God begins to breathe life into what was once lost. This act of restoration speaks to the very heart of God's nature. He does not discard his creation when it falters. Instead, he hovers over it, ready to breathe life back into it. This same Spirit is at work in our own lives, even in the midst of our brokenness. Just as the earth was formless and empty, so too do we often find ourselves in a state of emptiness, longing for purpose and meaning. Yet God's Spirit hovers over us, ready to restore us, to bring us back into alignment with his divine plan. In practical terms, we can relate to this act of restoration. Life often presents us with moments of chaos, when everything seems to fall apart, when we feel lost or broken. These moments of chaos are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of God's restorative work in our lives. Just as he did with the earth, God hovers over us, patiently waiting to speak light into our darkness. The Spirit of God does not force restoration upon us, but he invites us into it. He waits for us to respond, for us to surrender our chaos to him, so that he can bring light into the darkest corners of our hearts. This divine act of restoration also speaks to the ongoing nature of God's work. The creation in Genesis chapter 1 was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a continual process of restoration. God's work is not finished. Even after the fall of humanity, he continues to restore, to rebuild, and to redeem. The restoration of the earth in Genesis foreshadows the ultimate redemption that will come through Jesus Christ. Just as the Spirit of God brought life back to the formless earth, he continues to bring life to us through Christ, restoring our relationship with God and offering us the hope of eternal life. This is the heart of the gospel, that God is not in the business of discarding his creation, but of redeeming it. He takes what is broken, what is lost, and he brings it back to life. This is not just a truth for the earth, it is a truth for our lives. Every time we face a moment of despair, a moment of darkness, we can remember that God's Spirit is hovering over us, ready to speak light into our world. All we need to do is open our hearts and allow him to restore us. The restoration we see in Genesis chapter 1:3 is not just a return to what was, it is a transformation. God's restoration is not merely about fixing what was broken, but about making it even more beautiful than it was before. Just as the earth was given light, it was also given purpose. In the same way, when God restores us, he does not just make us whole again. He makes us new. His restoration is not a return to the past, but a step toward a glorious future. In our own lives, we often look back to a time before the chaos, before the struggle, wishing for a return to simplicity. But God's restoration is not about returning to an old version of ourselves. It is about becoming who we were always meant to be in his divine purpose. The Spirit of God works in us to transform us, to renew us, and to align us with his will. Just as the earth was made new with light, so too are we made new with his presence. The lesson here is clear. In times of darkness, in moments of chaos, God is at work. He is not absent. He is hovering over us, ready to bring light and life. We need only to open ourselves to his presence and trust in his process of restoration. No matter how lost we may feel, no matter how broken our world may seem, we are never beyond the reach of God's transformative love. And so, as we journey through life, let us remember the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. Let us trust in the restorative power of his presence. We are not abandoned to our chaos, we are being restored. God is at work, and his restoration is already in motion. In this section, we explored the role of spiritual beings in the creation narrative, focusing on the cosmic rebellion that led to the earth's chaos. We also examined the transformative power of God's Spirit in the act of restoration, a theme that resonates deeply in our own lives today. Just as God hovered over the earth to restore it, he continues to hover over us, bringing light into the darkness and life into the void. The silence of Genesis, what the Bible is not saying. In the grand narrative of Genesis, one of the most striking aspects is what is left unsaid. While the creation of the heavens and earth in Genesis chapter 1:1 is presented with grandeur and clarity, the transition to the formless and void state of the earth in Genesis 1:2 leaves us with a deafening silence. This silence is not an oversight. It is a deliberate pause, a space where the sacred text invites us to ponder, to seek, and to question. The absence of detailed explanation regarding the time between the two verses challenges us to look deeper, to peer into what is hidden between the lines, where the unspoken mysteries lie. Genesis doesn't tell us what happened between the perfection of verse 1 and the desolation of verse 2. Why is this? The text moves from the beauty of creation to a world submerged in chaos, with no explanation for the shift. This silence speaks volumes about the nature of the divine and the mysteries of the spiritual realm. It reminds us that there is more to reality than we can comprehend, that some things are too sacred, too profound, to be fully revealed in words. The silence could be viewed as a space left intentionally by God for us to explore, a place where we are called to search for deeper meanings and truths. In the silence, we can reflect on the unseen forces at work, the cosmic events that shape the Earth's history. This gap, this forgotten time, serves as an invitation for the spiritually discerning to seek understanding. It compels us to consider that the world, like our lives, is not simply what we see on the surface. Beneath the visible, there is a deeper, more intricate story being woven, a story that requires us to listen, to reflect, and to trust in the wisdom of God. This silence speaks to the unspoken mysteries of faith. It beckons us to contemplate what we cannot fully understand or articulate. Just as the earth in Genesis 1:2 was not empty, but teeming with divine potential, so too is the silence in the Bible filled with divine presence and purpose. In our own lives, we encounter times of silence, moments when we feel lost, uncertain, or distant from God. These moments, however, are not void of meaning. Like the silence between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, they are pregnant with divine purpose, calling us to trust in the unseen work of God. The silence between the verses also invites us to explore the importance of patience and waiting. In our fast-paced world, we often seek immediate answers, immediate results. But Genesis teaches us that some answers come only through stillness, through waiting, through reflecting on what is not yet revealed. This silence is not the absence of God's presence. It is a space where we are called to trust, to seek, and to open ourselves to a deeper understanding of His divine plan. What could have died before humanity? The sea as a spiritual abyss. The earth in Genesis chapter 1:2 is described as formless, void, and covered in darkness, with the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. What are these waters? What lies beneath them? The waters in this verse are not merely physical water. They represent something far deeper. In biblical imagery, the sea is often associated with chaos, destruction, and the unknown. But there's more to it. Could the sea represent a spiritual abyss, a place where something was lost, something that existed before humanity? The sea, in this context, could be a metaphor for a spiritual death, a place where things died before humanity even existed. Revelation 20:13 speaks of the sea giving up its dead, suggesting that the sea is not just a physical body of water, but a place of spiritual significance. What if the waters in Genesis 1:2 symbolize a realm where spiritual beings were lost, where memories of a fallen world are held? What if these waters represent the remnants of a divine rebellion or a lost kingdom? This interpretation leads us to a profound question. What could have died before humanity? What spiritual beings, kingdoms, or histories were swallowed by the abyss? Could it be that the chaos in Genesis 1:2 is the result of a cosmic battle, a rebellion in the spiritual realm that left the earth in a state of ruin? The idea of a spiritual abyss before humanity challenges our understanding of creation. It tells us that the world, as we know it, was shaped not just by divine creation, but by a cosmic struggle, a battle between light and darkness that predates humanity's existence. The waters in Genesis 1:2 invite us to look beyond the physical world and into the spiritual realm. They speak of a deeper reality, one that we often overlook in our daily lives. Just as the sea in the Bible represents a place of danger, mystery, and the unknown, so too do the struggles in our lives often point to a deeper spiritual battle. When we face challenges, it is easy to see them as mere obstacles. But what if they are echoes of a greater spiritual conflict, a struggle that has been ongoing since before the dawn of humanity? The sea, as a spiritual abyss, also represents a place of potential. In the same way that God's Spirit hovered over the waters, waiting to bring order and light, so too can God bring life into the chaos and darkness of our lives. The spiritual abyss is not just a place of death. It is a place where God can breathe new life. In our own struggles and moments of despair, we may feel as though we are sinking into the abyss. But the same Spirit that hovered over the waters in Genesis is still hovering over us, ready to restore and renew. The forgotten time and its significance, a spiritual wound in creation. The gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 is not just a historical mystery. It is a spiritual wound that has affected the entire fabric of creation. This forgotten time, the time between the perfect creation of Genesis 1:1 and the chaos of Genesis 1:2, is a spiritual wound that continues to affect us today. It is a wound that speaks of loss, of something that was once whole but was broken, of a time before humanity that has been erased from our collective memory. This wound is not just an abstract concept. It is something that manifests in our lives. The chaos we experience today, the brokenness, the confusion, it all points to this wound in creation. The world is not as it was meant to be. We live in a world that has been fractured, and the gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 speaks to the very core of that fracture. Just as the earth was once perfect but was brought to ruin, so too are we born into a world that is not what it should be. But the significance of this wound is not in its devastation, it is in its potential for healing. God did not abandon creation to the chaos. He hovered over the waters, preparing to restore and renew. And just as God's Spirit began the work of restoration in Genesis, so too does He continue that work in our lives today. The spiritual wound in creation is a wound that God is healing, a healing that began in Genesis and continues in our own lives. This forgotten time teaches us that healing is a process. It is not instantaneous, and it is not without its struggles. The restoration of the earth in Genesis chapter 3 was not a return to the way things were, it was a transformation. Similarly, the restoration in our lives is not about returning to some idealized version of ourselves. It is about becoming the people we were always meant to be. The wounds of the past, whether personal or cosmic, are not just scars. They are places where God's healing power can work. As we reflect on this forgotten time, we are reminded that the brokenness we experience is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of God's work of restoration. The gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 is a reminder that God is always at work, even in the midst of chaos and destruction. He is not just restoring the world, He is restoring us piece by piece, transforming us into His image. In this section, we explored the silence between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, delving into the mystery of the forgotten time and its profound spiritual significance. We also examined the idea of the sea as a spiritual abyss, a place of both death and potential, and reflected on how this forgotten time continues to affect us today. The lesson here is clear. God is always at work, restoring and healing, even in the darkest of times. Just as He hovered over the waters in Genesis, He continues to hover over us, ready to bring light into our chaos and life into our brokenness. As we come to the end of this journey through the forgotten time of Genesis, I want to leave you with a thought that may change the way you see the world and your place in it. The story of creation, as we explored together, is not just about the beginning of the world, but also about the spiritual realities that have shaped our lives today. Between the verses of Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, there is a silence that speaks of deep mysteries, of a world that fell, and of a divine restoration that is still unfolding. This gap in the story is more than a pause. It's an invitation to explore, to question, and to seek deeper truths that have been hidden in plain sight. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in the midst of chaos, much like the earth described in Genesis 1:2. The world around you may seem formless, void, and covered in darkness. Perhaps you feel lost, uncertain, or overwhelmed by the weight of life's struggles. But just as God hovered over the waters, ready to bring order and light, so too does He hover over your life, waiting to restore and renew. No matter how broken or distant you may feel, God's Spirit is always present, always ready to speak life into your darkness. And this, my friend, is the beauty of the biblical message. It's not a story of perfection from the start, but of redemption in the face of chaos. Just as the earth wasn't abandoned to the darkness, neither are we. God's restoration isn't just for the world at large. It's for you, for me, for all of us. His Spirit hovers over the waters of our lives, ready to bring us back to life, to speak light into our darkness, and to restore what was lost. But here's where it gets personal. Are you willing to let God restore you? The restoration process is not always easy. It requires us to surrender our brokenness to God, to trust that He is working even when we can't see it, and to open our hearts to the possibility of transformation. Sometimes we want to hold on to our darkness, our pain, because it's all we know. But God is inviting you to let go of the chaos, to let Him hover over you, to allow His Spirit to speak into the void and bring something new into your life. If this video has touched your heart, if it has brought even the smallest amount of light into your life, I encourage you to share that light with others. Like, subscribe, and comment below. Let's create a community of people who seek the truth in the silence, who dare to question the mysteries of the Bible and of life. Your support means the world to me and to this channel. Each time you interact with this video, you are helping spread the message of hope, restoration, and divine purpose. Every like, every share, every comment is a step toward making the light of the gospel shine brighter in this dark world. If you feel that this message has brought value to your soul, or if it has helped you find light in your darkest days, I invite you to show your support in any way you can. Every little bit of encouragement, every word of affirmation is invaluable to me as I continue to create these videos. Your support allows me to keep sharing the Word of God, to keep uncovering the hidden truths in the Bible, and to keep inspiring others to find their way out of the chaos and into the light. Remember, you are not alone in your struggles. Just as God hovered over the waters of the earth, He is hovering over you. No matter how dark it may seem, no matter how lost you may feel, God is always ready to restore and heal. His Spirit is there, waiting to bring order to the chaos. Trust in that, and know that the restoration you seek is already in motion. As we close, take a moment to reflect on the deeper truth of Genesis 1:1 to 1:2. It's not just the beginning of creation, it's the beginning of restoration, and that restoration is ongoing, both for the world and for you. The silence in Genesis is not empty. It is filled with the promise of new beginnings, of light breaking through the darkness, of life emerging from the chaos. And as we continue to seek the truths hidden in the Scriptures, may we remember that we are part of this grand, divine restoration. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being part of this journey. I am grateful for each one of you who watches, likes, subscribes, and comments. Your presence here is a blessing, and together we can continue to explore the mysteries of the Bible and the incredible journey of restoration that God has for each of us. Let us keep seeking, keep learning, and keep shining His light into the world. If you feel moved, leave a comment below. Let's discuss. What do you think happened between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2? What is God speaking to you in this moment? Let's engage in this conversation together and allow the Spirit to lead us into deeper understanding and healing. Thank you for being here. Your support makes all the difference.